Greg, you signed in as the host?
I am. Let's see, I can make you co-host, Jeff.
Please.
Greg, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Sue.
Okay. I just want to confirm, did you receive my presentation just in case there's any glitch?
Did you send the latest and greatest?
I did. I sent it about 5:36, something in there.
All right, let me get that called up.
I don't expect there'll be a glitch, but
No, it's good to have a backup.
It is technology, so.
Yeah, I will.
Is that the one you sent out in the email, Greg?
It's a little bit changed. There's a
It
few
might have
changes
changed
to
a
it.
little. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, got you backed up. So
Perfect, thanks.
So you should be able to share your screen.
I will give that a try. Do you want me to try it now just to see if it works, or should I
Sure.
wait?
yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Those are funny looking pine trees, Gary.
My apologies.
If you're outside at this time of night, Gary, with no hat on.
It's the afternoon here.
What time is it?
4 o'clock, Sacramento. Yeah, 7 o'clock.
So I think that worked. Did you see my screen? temporarily?
That was fine.
Temporary, yeah, we saw it
Okay.
for a minute.
Okay.
We're at 7 o'clock, but there's a number of people who are signing in. So I want to give it just one more minute before we start. Okay, I think we're good to go. This is a public forum meeting of the Board of Selectmen. And we're going to open this meeting at 7:02 p.m. on Tuesday, March 22nd. Some familiar faces here from last night. This meeting is a public forum on the new multi-family zoning requirements for MBTA communities, of which we are one. And the primary focus of this forum tonight is going to be for Sue Brown to present the outline of the MBTA requirements, the state requirements that are being put forth. These are not finalized in terms, as I understand it, in terms of all the regulations. So there's still an opportunity to comment on the regulations, which the Board of Selectmen may be doing. So I think we can go straight to, unless there's any comments from the board. Any comments from Greg?
Just to say that, there's already been some concerns expressed about the new law, but I think it also might be an opportunity for us to merge some of our master plan goals of trying to diversify our housing stock in a way that is in keeping with the character of the community. I think that as will be shown, we already have quite a few examples of projects that have a much higher density than the minimum and required in the new law of 15 units per acre. So I don't think we should necessarily be afraid of that, if I can use that phrase. That certainly there are challenges and there's a lot of discussion that needs to take place with the community, and the more public participation, the better. And we have time. We have a couple of years to work through what makes the most sense for Manchester. So I encourage people to approach this with an open eye. Obviously, we want to be careful in our deliberations and critical in our reviews, but that ultimately, in the end, if we can advance our own goals of providing more diverse housing and utilize this new provision that the state has provided, then all for the good. So lots of work to be done, and this is just the beginning. So with that, I think if we turn it over to Sue, she can walk us through some of those details, and we can start the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. And I will share my screen and we'll get started. So thanks so much for attending and for your interest and your willingness to take part in this community discussion, one of what I'm sure will be many. I'll be presenting an overview of the new changes to the Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, as well as the MBTA multifamily guidelines. I'll provide some context for these with information about Manchester, and do my best to answer questions and maybe call on others where I might fall short. I'm hoping I'll keep the presentation to 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for those questions. I'm going to start with the why and then move to the what, when, and how. Here we go. We'll start with the why. Why this and why now? So housing is a basic need, not only for family security and health, but it's also a key component of our economic health. So to keep the story short, to keep and grow jobs, we need housing that's available and appropriate and affordable. So in 2019, the Mass Housing Partnership looked at transit stations in the area. I found a fairly low residential density of 6.2 units per acre. And then they found that increasing that number from roughly 6 to 10 units per acre could really have a profound impact on our housing inventory over time, and thereby supporting our local and regional economies. Housing close to transportation is both a historical development pattern. Think of housing around stagecoach shops and train stations and even harbors. And it's also a current concept, as we've learned or maybe remembered that transit-oriented development really contributes to a more vibrant and walkable downtowns. And the benefits extend beyond housing and the economy to the environment. As we slow the demand for housing on undeveloped land, and discourage reliance on vehicles. So it's really good policy on many fronts. So that's the why in short speak, and now the what. The MBTA Communities Law was part of the economic bond bill that passed in 2021. It included a lot of provisions for economic development, including housing, because it's part of the economic story. One of the things that we're not talking about, but it was included in the bill, was that it lowered the threshold for town votes for certain zoning provisions that help create or allow the creation of housing or remove barriers to multifamily housing in particular. And then the bill also requires that MBTA communities have a zoning district that allows multifamily by right, which is what we are talking about tonight. So the guidelines came about a year later, and as Jeffrey said, they're open for public comment through March 31st of this year. You can do that right through the mass.gov website through a very easy submittal. So the law is the law, and the guidelines at this point are just draft. It's important to note that the guidelines do not require that any units be built, and also that they don't have anything to do with 40B. I'm just going to give a kind of brief comparison of the law and the guidelines. So the law says that we need at least one reasonably sized district, and the guidelines define that as 50 acres. And it can include sub-districts as long as they're a minimum of 5 acres. The law says it must be as of right multifamily, and the guidelines then defined multifamily as 3 or more units, something that we already allow in our downtown. The law said it had to be suitable for families. The guidelines said that means that there's no limits to the number of bedrooms in the zoning and no age restrictions. But both of those things can be, both types of development with smaller bedroom size and age restricted units can be proposed by a developer and approved, but we can't make it a restriction of our zoning. The law noted a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, and the guidelines promulgated and determined that for Manchester, because of the size, the number of units we have in our town, currently we have a minimum capacity of 750 units, which is the 50 acres at 15 units an acre. There are some communities that have a larger, that need to create greater capacity than us. No community has a capacity less than 750. That's the minimum. And the law said it has to be no more than a half mile from the train station. The guidelines said, well, at least half of the land area needs to be within half a mile of the station. Other sub-districts can be approved outside of that if the context, if necessary, and that depends on the context of the community. So a little more about the guidelines. I want to just kind of touch on a few, respond to a few questions or comments that I've heard. The town doesn't need to allow 15 units for the entire 50 acres. They can create sub-districts with a greater density in some and lower density in the other, as long as overall it's the 15 units per acre, 750 units that allowed. While by right, while we need to have it by right, we still have site plan review that's within the power of the planning board, and there are still regulations that go hand in hand with that. I want to point out that the minimum required capacity must be attainable in the district. And I'll talk a little bit about more about this in a later slide, but in short, we can't create zoning that says allows 15 units per acre just by saying a minimum lot size and a minimum number of units, and then at the same time create other regulations that would make it impossible or improbable. So we couldn't say, but you can only cover 40% of the lot and you must have 3 units per acre, because in essence, those would make that not attainable. So that's where we'll need to do a little mapping, a little work to figure out exactly what we have. All communities will, and that's why the state and Mass Housing Partnership are developing tools and technical assistance that we can use and that we can ask for. Many have noticed that this law doesn't address affordability, and the regulations do not require it. However, towns can choose to require an affordability component, and they can decide how to do that. So now I just want to go over some important dates for these. It's important to know that we do have time, as you can see by this timeline. The state, again, is accepting public comments on its draft guidelines through March 31st. By May 2nd, the community has to submit a community information form, and in essence, it says we've held a briefing and a little bit of other information that keeps us in compliance until December, when we must submit either a request for compliance, meaning we've adopted such zoning or have such zoning, or submit an action plan to outline our steps. That needs to be approved by July of 23, but we have until the end of December 2024 to adopt the zoning and be in compliance. But as long as we meet the steps of May and December of this year, we'll stay in compliance. And what does that mean? So by complying with it, we remain eligible for these pots of money. We have used, in addition to these pots of money, the guidelines also say that DHCD may take non-compliance into consideration when making other discretionary grant awards. So while they call out 3 pots of money in particular, they don't say that that's the only repercussions. So a number of folks have asked what those loss of fundings would mean for Manchester. So we have used housing choice funds, 100,000 for the wastewater treatment facility decommissioning study in 2020. We've also used Mass Works funds in 2019 for the harbor dredging. To date, we've not used the local capital projects, but they can be used for acquisition of land or improvements of land, buildings, as well as infrastructure. We do anticipate using Mass Works funding in the future for our next phase of harbor dredging, possibly around 1.75 million. And we also may use it for water and sewer line replacement. So I just want to stop briefly here and pause, because I recognize that sometimes it's human nature when to react to a demand with resistance. And I want to kind of mimic what Greg has said, is that we should consider that our town master plan has already identified the need and the desire for more housing in our downtown. We're already considering how we can revise zoning to meet local needs, because we know it is good housing policy and good economic policy and good environmental policy. So these are goals taken directly out of the master plan that precedes this law by 3 or 4 years. So now I did say we'd look at Manchester, and here's what I'd like to show you. This, if you can see it, this red line, this red radius shows the half-acre mile from the station. It includes about 450 acres of land. And notice that the general district in blue is entirely within that zone. We need a multifamily district that's 50 acres, so just about 1/9 of all that land within that area, and just half the size of the general district that's in blue. So we're not talking about a large land area if we go with a minimum 50-acre lot size. And now I want to go even in closer and look at the general district specifically, because it is a natural boundary for the district, although the district is not decided. But let's just take this for an example. So with a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet means that we could have 7 lots per acre. Our zoning already allows 3 dwelling units per lot by right in existing buildings, 4 units by special permit. So if we just extrapolate that a bit, a 50-acre district times 7 acres per lot gives us a potential for 350 potential lots. We times that times the 3 that are units that could be allowed on a lot, the potential for 1,050 residential units and a density of 21 units per acre. We know that's not what exists. There are currently 251 lots on the 75 acres and 551 residential units. So if we take a very gross look at this, we look like that we're close to complying. I do need to read or point out the small print and remind you that this potential isn't quite enough because we know that all 50 acres can't be divided into 6,000 square foot lots. We don't have the street frontage to divide them all. Some of them are already 8,000 or 9,000 square feet. So we know it's not realistic to say that we're already there. But what it does show is that where lot sizes are near the minimum, that the allowed density exceeds that which is required. So I don't think it's a long jump from where we are to where we need to be. So. I'd just like to point out a few areas. There are a cluster of houses on Union Street that I would say exemplify town character, right in the core of our downtown. Their lot sizes range from 4,000 to 12,000 square feet, so all under 1/4 of an acre. And with unit counts between 3 and 8 units per building, that gives a density of 31 units per acre. And so we just need to think, is this the type of density that's appropriate downtown? Is this the type of housing that's appropriate? Another one is a little different type of housing, but it's been embraced in our downtown. There are 40 units on 2 acres with a density of about 18 units per acre. So what we have a lot in our downtown, and there's multiple clusters of these throughout our downtown neighborhoods. So I just, again, want to point out that we're living with a density that exceeds that in many clustered neighborhoods. And I think that the regulations offer us an opportunity to create sub-districts and continue to identify where housing is should be dense, and then we can use the balance of the area to look at a lower density. So it really can be contextual. A few more ideas to consider as we're moving forward. Sub-districts of varying densities could provide a good opportunity. Varying dimensions, even within those sub-districts, allow us to really take the context of the neighbors into consideration. We should be clear that a 40R, I just want to say a 40R district is an option that provides a financial incentive and doesn't require anything further than what we're looking at. So that is an option as well. And we have an opportunity to think about a real diversity of housing types, everything from the multifamily that we see at 1012 Summer Street to the historical homes that we see that are that cluster along Union Street. We know we have to take into consideration parking can be a constraining element, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. We know that by right doesn't mean unregulated, and that we'll have the opportunity to create very specific dimensional requirements. Not only can we use site plan review, but historic commission review can be part of that. And again, I said earlier that zoning can't include age restrictions or restrict the number of bedrooms, but that doesn't mean that developers cannot propose that and that the board cannot approve those, or it wouldn't need approval by right, but it can be built, it just can't be restricted. And then finally, I just want to say development doesn't automatically following zoning. If that did, we'd have all three units in the general district, which we don't, and it's not the norm. So I am going to finish up with just a few next steps, but I want us to consider that There is residential density in the downtown, and it lives and it is part of our historic and character and authentic. And I think we can embrace the goals of protecting the town's character and its natural resources and really promote housing where it's most appropriate. If we take our time and work on this together. So I'm already down to next steps in the discussion. So our next steps is we really have to assess our capacity to study these options and opportunities for compliance. There are a number of tools that are already out there. We need to identify what they are and then identify what other needs are there and then request the assistance as appropriate. We need to continue to engage with the community. And with the community, outline the goals and the work plan that will need to be submitted in December. We have a whole year after that, 2 years after that, to develop the plan and the regulations, and until 2024, the end of 2024, to comply with the deadline. So I would like to open up to questions. There's a lot in the regulations that I didn't go over and that you may have questions about, but I'm happy to open it up to questions. I'll try to stop sharing.
You might want to keep it up, Sue, just in case we
Oh.
want to. Well, that's all right.
Sorry, so you want it up? I
That's
didn't
all
know
right.
if you
We'll
wanted
go back to it,
see
Sue, if we need to.
people. Okay,
Yeah, you might need to put it back up, but let's wait and see.
sure.
I have a question about the May deadline. Since comments are being taken through March 31st, how long after the comments period ends will the draft guidelines become not draft, but the guidelines within which we would have to operate?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that it doesn't really affect the May 2nd deadline, because that's simply a deadline that communities have to let DHCD know that they've held a briefing, held a community forum. So it would come into play if they didn't decide on the guidelines until the end of the year, and then it changed something in our work plan, but I wouldn't anticipate that to be the case. So.
Okay. Becky.
So, thank you for that. I actually have several questions, and are you going to be putting the slides up on your presentation on the town website?
I'd be happy.
I figured as much. Okay, thank you. Do you know how many units we have currently in the area that would meet or that would be applicable to the 750 total?
So what we have so I've broken it out kind of by the general districts, because that was a piece that was big enough to think about. And that's twice the size that we need. So if you just use that, there's 551 residential units in that area, in that district. Which
In
is
other words, we would only need about 200 more to be compliant.
well. So here's what I want to let people know is that the 750 capacity number has nothing to do with what exists.
So this is completely brand new units that they would be.
No, well, let me finish. It doesn't mean we have to create 750 more new units either. What it says is that there must be capacity for 750 units within that district. So even if we have, so say we have the unit has to have a capacity for 750 units. If we have zoning, the zoning that's there now would not allow that density. Even though we have a number of units a cluster of that is more dense than that. But if they were to be redeveloped, they could not be redeveloped at that density. So the regulations only say that we need to have a district that allows that minimum capacity, or 750 units. It's not on top of what we have, and it's not taking into account what we have. If everything blew up, we would need 750 units.
So just to follow this through, though, the explanation that you've just given to me. So if we approve that type of zoning requirement that would enable for those, that 750 unit density,
Mhm.
and that is as of right or by right, which seem to be interchangeable,
Yes.
then we are allowing that to be able to be done without any way to deny it. You can guide it somewhat, but it really is opening the door for that to be done.
It allows the density that we determine to be, So it may be 15 acres per density across the whole 50 acres. It may be 30 units per acre for 20 and 4 units per acre around the balance. So
I get
yeah.
that, but it
Okay.
still has to allow for
750 units.
which are not including what's that does not include what's existing now.
It includes what exists now. It doesn't matter whether it exists or not, is what I'm saying. We're not saying 500 exists, so we only need 250 more. We don't have to, it's not that kind of balance. It's what you need to think about is, if there was nothing else built there, you need to say, by right, you could build 750 units in this area.
I get that. My question is to have a clear understanding of what a cap would look like. All right, that's it for now. Thank you.
So I guess just to try to pursue that a little further.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
the-
I don't think I was very good at answering Becky's
Well,
question.
so I don't know if the guidelines spell it out all the way yet. I think this may be an area that may need additional guidance from the state. So I think the short answer to Becky's question is, you can take credit for some existing, but not all, depending on how those were created and would they comply with the new by right guidelines. Is that closer to?
Well, so if, for example, yes, so if what you have could be recreated, in other words, if it could be allowed by regulations again, then it would count. So for example, 10 to 12 Summer Street could not be recreated under current zoning because it required a 40B, a comprehensive permit. If we took that site and created regulations so that it could be recreated, then it would count. But
Right.
It's not, the density at Union Street could not be recreated because some of the units have 7 and 8 units. So you can't, so unless you change the underlying zoning so that they could be developed again, it wouldn't count.
Good, thank you. The two of those clarified it a bit more for me, and sorry if my question was a little.
No,
No,
it's a good question. There's a
Thank
lot of confusion.
One clarification, and then I want to go, Mary's got her hand up, and I want to go to Mary and now Christina. One clarification. 750 units, what you had previously said was a unit or a building would have to have 3 residences within it. Is that 750 times 3 that we have to have?
Yeah.
Or is it 250 units that have at least 3 multifamily
If the maximum number of units you wanted per building was 3, then you would need 250 buildings with 3 units. Not
Right.
that you need to have them, but you would need to allow that.
Right. The gun here, the smoking gun here is if you say, okay, well, if we want to include 10 to 12 summer and we bring the regulations or the zoning bylaws to put that in as something that we could include, that opens it up for other developers to come in and do a 10 to 12 summer without going through the 40B process, because now they have by right.
Well, you still have other regulations that they would need to meet. So you can still say how tall, you can still say what those setbacks, you could still say. And it's a town's choice to say what that density is, as long as it's at least 15 overall.
Okay. Mary, you've had your hand up. I'd like to recognize you.
Thank you. Sue, could you clarify, the slide was showing 75 acres and that we currently have 551 residential units. Could you clarify those numbers, what those actual numbers are for the true 50 acres? And give us an idea of the numbers of what would count. My understanding is 12 Summer Street, that example wouldn't count. It's a good bulk of it is senior housing. So senior housing would not count. Studio apartments wouldn't count. 1 bedroom wouldn't count. Those aren't family friendly. So can we get an idea of what our true number is today for that 50 acres? So that's one question. And then when do we engage FinCom to try to get some analysis from them on financial impacts, pro or cons on this draft regulation?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your question. So I have not, because we have not decided on a 50-acre district, I've not broken it out. So I don't know how many units would be in a 50-acre district. I only did, as an example, figured out how many units were in the general district, which is larger than we need. It's close to 100 acres, 75 of it is, if you take out streets and things, there's 75 acres worth of developable land or lots. And there are 551, I think, was the number of units in that district. So I don't want people to be confused to think that that they wouldn't be. The HCD is not looking at with a microscope to see how many bedrooms, et cetera, are in what exists. So that's why I'm saying what exists. This regulations is not trying to say what exists. They're only trying to identify what would exist under new zoning. That's why we need to create new zoning that would allow 15 units per acre. And it doesn't really matter what's there now. We're not being punished because they're single families or because they're deed restricted to elders. It really just doesn't come into play. This is really about creating regulations that could, if something were redeveloped, that it could meet those guidelines. So it really, again, we're not being punished, or we're not able to count certain things that are there, because that really just isn't part of the equation, counting what exists. It's only about what could exist in the future. In terms of a FinCom, I think that trying to assess the impact of a zoning bylaw and not a particular project is problematic, because it has to start at zero, because nothing may happen as a result of a change in zoning. We've seen that in many zoning districts or zoning regulations, that nothing comes of it. So it has to be anywhere from zero to what end, the total build out. So I don't think that what would come out of an exercise would provide any credible or a useful answer that could help make a decision. It also, if you think about a fiscal analysis, what that says is that the financial aspect is the only thing that matters. Where is the analysis that puts a value to secure housing or to economic development or to a walkable neighborhood? So it's in my opinion, it's kind of a study that won't provide you with a good decision-making tool in the end.
My
But I
reason
leave
for
that-
that question is that
I-
we do have to look at the whole picture. We can't, just say one aspect of it is good and thus we should ignore doing our due diligence. It's one piece of the puzzle that should be looked at. Thank you.
Christina.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have a few questions and
Christina,
maybe I'll just,
I'm sorry, I didn't do this with Marion. I should have. Could
Oh, I'm
you
sorry.
identify
Yep.
your street?
got it. Yep. Christina Delicio, 6 Lincoln Ave. I have a few questions. I'll just rattle them off and some of them may be more of a comment. So my first question was there any outreach to people that lived in the half-mile district? Were they notified at any point? I feel like that's actually really important. There was some chatter among neighbors. I feel like I might be on the line. Who was actually on the line of this half-mile? I think it would be nice to know that. Number two, I think Mary had a good point about the finance committee, and Sue, you talked about capacity. And so your point at secure housing, walkable neighborhoods, great, important. I can't deny it, very important. But same thing is our schools, what is the capacity there? 700 units, 250 units. What number? I mean, we've talked about on the planning board, what is the capacity of our water, sewer, police, fire? What are the impacts on all of those? And I think the finance committee will have a role in that. Number three, what is the historical society or the historical properties of many? There's a historical district. I'm concerned about that. And tear downs. I mean, we're talking about having a neighborhood that people can walk to the grocery store. So if there's an incentive to tear down Crosby's and build a parking lot and apartments or any type of family housing there, where are these people going to walk to and shop? So I feel like we need some kind of incentive to keep the businesses that we have versus encouraging developers to tear down the very few businesses that we have there. I am concerned about that. And at what point will the Board of Selectmen tell us what their opinion is of this? Will you publish your letter? Are you publishing an opinion to the state? Are you sending something? So those are my 5 questions.
I can start. I can't speak to the planning board or the Board of Selectmen or the FinCom, but I think there are folks that probably will talk to that. So a lot of the questions that you brought up are things that we do want to find out in this process, but they have not started yet. For example, people within the half-mile district. No, we haven't done any, we haven't notified them. This is a kind of a first discussion that we're having of it. I think when we identify a district, that would be the time to get very specific and granular. We'll certainly put these maps and presentation out on the website so people can see if they're within that. I think the important thing is, what kind of changes, if any, are we going to make within that district? Incentives to tear down. I don't think that this legislation has anything to do with trying to incentivize tear downs, or that it will incentivize that, because I think we have the opportunity to say where we want that density of housing and all the regulations that go with that. So I think that we can do things that actually protect our downtown businesses. For example, we could say that residential downtown can only be allowed on second, third floors, and that all downtown storefronts must remain public storefronts. So that's not an uncommon regulation in downtowns, and we don't have it now, but we could if we change the zoning downtown. So I do think that that's a valid question to think about our businesses and what impact more residential would have on them. But I think as long as we're aware and we're thinking about that, that's exactly what we can do, is create those kinds of regulations. Did I miss? I feel like I missed one.
Well, sort of going back to the fiscal question, I think it might be instructive to note that our current zoning, again, just to go back to some of your initial analysis in your presentation, Sue, is that under our current zoning, we can add more than 750 units. So we have that potential today.
Not by right.
Yes, you do. You do have it by right throughout the town, no question. You can
If you
certainly add
tear
more
down. If you tear down.
Excuse me, Christina,
I'm sorry.
you're going to need to be recognized by the chair. I don't want there to be cross conversations in this. We need to at least
very
have an
sorry.
opportunity
My
for Greg to
apologies.
finish saying what he's saying.
So my simple point was that townwide, we have a by right in our bylaws today that allow for much more than 750 more housing units.
Greg, is there anything else that you would like to say about that?
No, again, it's all part of how we want to steer those units that we currently do allow. We may want to make changes townwide, but lots of discussions. I mean, this, as Sue indicated, this is just the very, very beginning of this process.
And Jeff or Greg, did you want to answer Christina's question about the Board of Selectmen, whether they're going to share their thoughts on this legislation or
This is the first
regulation guidelines?
I'll speak to the Board of Selectmen, and other selectmen may want to speak in on this as well. This is the first public hearing that we've had on this. The Board of Selectmen has had no other public discussions of this. And there is the deadline on commenting on the regulations, which is coming up rapidly on a week from Thursday. And the Board of Selectmen will likely have some comments on the draft guidelines that we will submit, and they will be discussed and hopefully discussed in an open meeting next Tuesday morning that's scheduled. But commenting on the draft regulations is not formulating an opinion of the Board of Selectmen in regard to how we approach this. I'm very concerned about the short deadlines. These are very, very short deadlines for us. We've spent the last 2 years in the planning board going through and trying to revise existing bylaws and existing regulations in the town, which is what the bylaws are. There's been a lot of work done on that, a lot of hours put into that. This is an even bigger change than most of what's being proposed by the planning board. So I have concerns about the shortness of the deadlines. You clarified that, the deadline that we first face is that we've had a public meeting on this. And then comes December or at the end of the year. But at the end of the year, we're supposed to have not just regulations, but we're supposed to have bylaw changes.
No,
No,
just a plan. By the end of the year, we just need to submit a plan to the HPCD to say, this is how we think that we will approach this. It's not the regulations. It's not even the draft regulations. So if I indicated something different, it's just a plan, how the steps that we'll take to comply. It's not the regulation. I apologize for that.
So I can't speak to what the Board of Selectmen's opinions on this will be, or when they will happen. to answer Christina's question. Because we're going to be discussing this along with all the other issues that we discuss, probably at most of the meetings that we have going forward, at many of the meetings that we have going forward. Having said that, I'm going to recognize Ian from the Board of Selectmen and then Sandy.
Thank you, Jeff. In looking at the maps that you showed, there were large areas that were undeveloped. And I think they include the 1661 cemetery, probably the memorial school, the Coachfield Field. And I think we need to be careful in discussing this and much more careful in designing the district so that we don't include large acreage that can't be developed under any circumstances. At least I hope it can't. I'd hate to tear down this new school and build. So my comment.
Thank you, Ann. And I would add to that list areas in that district that are subject to rising sea and climate change. Sandy, could you please identify yourself and your address?
Hi, Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. I have a couple questions and a couple comments. I'm a little confused and would like the difference between what I'm hearing some of us saying that we need to make a lot of changes and what Greg said is that we already have it covered by right. That to me is a little confusing. When I'm hearing two different angles to that. So if that can be clarified, that would be great.
Okay, hold on one second, Sandy.
Yep.
Or do you want to respond to that since it was specifically in response to what you said?
Yeah, I don't think I said that we are covered by our by right uses. I don't think it's as big as a lift as a lot of us perhaps initially feared. As we dive deeper, I'm finding that we already have densities that exceed the request. So that, you know, at first I was really worried, boy, that 15 unit per acre sounds like a big number. But then when I find out that we have development in the town that already well exceeds that, it sort of relaxes me a little more, that it doesn't seem as heavy as a lift as I initially thought. So I think that's what I was trying to convey, that we do have some changes to make, but I don't, from my perspective, they're not as heavy as I initially thought.
Okay, it was just a little confusing when you said we already had the 750 by right and even beyond that. So,
well, in terms of total density, yes, but this is obviously concentrating it in this half mile
right
area. So.
Regarding, I don't know if the state gave any reason why you can't have a 2-family versus it has to be 3 and above. That could be something that we could, as a town, comment on. It increases the density by far with housing. So that is one thing. 2, the amount of land that we have to use, half of that is taken up by water because of our geography, which doesn't give us a lot of choice that other towns may have. So that's another thing to be looking at, sort of akin to what Jeffrey was saying about also we've got rising tide issues and other concerns. And then the third issue is our access to public transportation is significantly decreased because we do not get the train as often as many other locations do because of the way that the train splits. And so, you know, there seems to be an idea with MBTA and the trains that, you know, people can get around a lot on the train. We're in a community that, you know, having taken the train into the city to commute, you still need a car to get around and live here for the most part. So that's another situation that doesn't really make all the cities and towns equal. I know that we're at a lower level potentially because of our population, but I don't know if there are some considerations that need to be taken regarding how really useful the MBTA is to our community. So those are just some comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Eli,
Jeff, oh, sorry.
I'll start with a question for Sue for interpretation about the district, because I'm a little bit, the language is a little bit confusing. It says that there needs to be at least one district of reasonable size, and the guidelines say 50 acres total. And then it also says at least 1/2 of the land area of the district within a half mile of the station. Is there a requirement that the district be a single contiguous district, or can it be a district conforming to the 50-acre requirement within a half mile of the train station, and another district further away that's not contiguous with the district around the train station? That's my first question. Then I got a follow-up comment.
go ahead, Sue.
So it does not need to be contiguous. They're really allowing the context of the community to kind of dictate this, although we would need to make a case of why that would be needed, either because lack of land, et cetera. And it will be answered on a case-by-case basis. But so they are allowing some flexibility with that. I think you would need to come up with a compelling reason why an area further away would be more appropriate, and go from there. I do want to say, I just want to respond to Sandy, who said that half of our area is taken up by water. But in fact, only 50 acres of the 500-acre half-mile radius is water. So I don't think that there's not a big impact of actual water to that 500-acre, of which we only need 50 acres of. I don't think it will be a limiting factor. Sorry,
Okay.
Eli, go ahead.
So my follow-up comment, and I guess it's partly a question. So if so our master plan does make an argument for trying to push for some higher density within the downtown district to encourage potentially affordable housing where it would be, some people perceive it to be more useful next to transportation, next to shops, etc. And as Greg pointed out, we already have throughout the town areas where by right you can construct to as good or better than the density that's being asked for in these draft guidelines, but is not constructed yet to those maximum build outs. If in fact there is a significant concern about the finances of potentially maximally building out such a district, is it within scope for us to decide where that district should be, allow it by right, and then if we truly believe that there is a concern about financials, because we suspect that builders will just swoop in there and build out everything to the maximum, can we restrict other areas where already builders can build out to this maximum density but have not? Can we trade off by limiting, putting in limitations to restrict it to lower density, some of those other areas that already have the by right to build out to the densities that some people seem to be concerned with.
Yeah,
I
so
could just-
sir, oops, sorry.
I was just going to
Go
jump
ahead,
in and
Greg.
say, so in essence, can we do a transfer of development rights approach?
Yes, transfer the density.
Yes.
So you can, there's nothing that would stop you from, so right now we allow 3 units per lot. Our minimum lot size is 6,000 throughout the general district. We could entirely change the general district zoning, make some of it a single or 2 family limit, and make it higher in others. As long as, I mean, so you could do that even outside the 50 acres. It's only saying that inside a 50-acre district, you need to have by right at 15 units per acre, which again is less than 3 units on a 6,000 acre lot.
Okay.
So
So in other words, it sounds like that it would be possible for us to essentially make the financial impact, the calculable financial impact, 0, even at the maximal build out, simply by trading off densities.
Yeah,
That was what I wanted to make.
yeah.
Thank
If you
you.
think, yep.
Laura Tenney.
Hi, Laura Tenney with 86 Pine Street. I don't have questions, but I've been reading through the regs and the FAQs, and I just want to make some statements, and not proposing that I'm speaking for the planning board here. I'm here as a citizen, but with a strong interest in this issue. I do believe firmly that Manchester should support the goal of the regulations that the state is proposing here to support walkable, transit-oriented, environmentally responsible development. We've said in our master plan that we're interested in providing a diversity of housing and in some, where appropriate, in places like the downtown. So I just want to make 3 points for the board's consideration. One is the historic downtown core that we all love is something that could not be built under current zoning regulations. You can't create that kind of historic development pattern under most zoning. Our downtown's not something that's fixed in time. Technology changes. We're not shoeing horses or making harnesses anymore. The downtown changes and it will continue to change. And I think we have an opportunity here to guide the development and preserve the character that we're talking about, but also increase housing that will be a benefit to the businesses and create a vibrant downtown neighborhood. 2, if we're looking at financial costs and opportunities here, we need to strongly consider our access to state funds. And if we decide not to comply, precluding access to those state funds, especially where we've said this meets the stated goals in the master plan. This is not a threat, it's an opportunity, and I feel like we should view it as such. And the third thing, and I really want to stress this is an equity issue. Our zoning allows single family housing as of right. It does not allow multifamily housing as of right. We need to think hard about what kind of town do we want to be and what kinds of housing do we want to encourage for people. We're still going to have site plan review. We're still going to have all the kinds of controls that we decide as a town to put on it and make it appropriate. But this is the right thing to do to create a district where multifamily housing is allowed as of right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Mr. Cross.
Thanks. Bill Cross, 31 Smiths Point Road. Thank you, Selectmen, for putting this meeting together, and thank you, Sue, for the educational components. I agree with 100%, maybe even 110% of what Laura just said. And I speak also as a citizen rather than as president of the Citizens Initiative for Manchester Affordable Housing. Although my work for SEMA has informed my understanding of Section 3A. I agree that this can be a real positive for the town if Manchester implements Section 3A with appropriate due process. I also think that in the context of Manchester's unique circumstances, the 750 unit, 50 acre requirement, however the guidelines are ultimately promulgated, may make it more complex to implement Section 3A in our community. So I think there's real dexterity needed in taking this new law and set of guidelines and implementing them right. For that reason, I recommend that the Board of Selectmen commission a time-limited task force to deliver a report by the end of October with specific advice to the Board of Selectmen on how to respond to Section 3A by the year-end deadline. I would suggest that the task force be small enough to get things done, but large enough that, like the Water Resources Task Force, it draws talent widely from town boards and from volunteers not currently serving on town boards. I recommend that the board name John Whitten as advisor to the task force and place.
You're getting way ahead of yourself
Okay.
in terms of making specific recommendations
Okay.
about who would be on the board.
Okay. Well, it's just an idea to try to draw out, for the benefit of the town, talent that is on the sidelines and wants to help. And I hope that people both from the planning board and from the FinCom and from the Board of Selectmen itself can participate in a task force of this kind to alleviate overly crowded agendas that are carried by very stretched volunteers now. I hope that this is helpful, and I'm sorry if this seems a overly assertive point of view. I'm seeking simply as a citizen to help the town.
I just want to clarify my comment to you, Bill, that you've proposed this task force, which is an interesting proposal. But to get into who should be on it and who should represent us legally, I think is first we would have to agree to doing the task force, and then we could get into who should be on it and who should represent us.
Okay. Thank you.
I just want to keep the sequence at least intact.
Fair enough.
And
Thanks.
thank you for your comments. They're very interesting. Okay. Next up would be John Round.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And thanks for your presentation, Sue. I really have one question. It gets a little bit to, I think, what Eli had touched on a few minutes or so ago. Is there any plan to do an analysis? And if not, will there be a plan to do an analysis of exactly where we stand with regard to how well we meet the 750 units right now? In other words, how many units or how many lots do we have that have 15 units or more, so that they really kind of meet the requirements without doing much of anything? Is there an analysis to know where we're at with that, or an analysis planned?
Jeff? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think that's part of the due diligence that we need to do, is just assess where that is. So I would say that that's part of us assessing what we need and checking out to see what tools are available, and then asking for assistance if we need it. So again, I don't want people to be confused when they think about what already exists, because what's important with this legislature is what could exist under new zoning.
No, we push that around, and I understand where that stands. But I mean, the total has to come out, or the average has to come out at 15 units. But we've got some places where there are more than 15 unit densities per acre already.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, based on the lots that we have, where that stands. And I find it kind of curious that you, or maybe it was Greg, that said, we're not way off from that, and we're Manchester by the Sea. And I look at this, and if we're that close, you know, what kind of progress is this whole 48 thing going to do if so many communities are so close and everybody comes back and says, you know, I'm within 30% or 40% or 10%, it's just curious. So I'm really interested in seeing an analysis and where our community stands with all of this. And I do have some concerns about the historic district, but I understand that that would be off limits for all of this. But it seems like we've got space to be able to deal with that, exclusive of that.
Well, if I could just jump in on the HDC, John, I think it doesn't need to exclude the HDC district, but the HDC requirements would be an added layer of review. So even though it's a by right use, it would still have to go through HDC review and approval.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else, John?
That's it, Jeff. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Kathy Bellata.
Hi, Kathy Bellata, 21 Pine Street. First of all, I want to thank Sue Brown for that excellent presentation. You have taken a concept that is extremely complex, and I just think you did an excellent job of laying out, where we stand. So thank you for that. I like the town administrator Federspiel started the conversation by saying we should not fear density, and agree with the comments that we could view this as an opportunity to meet some of the goals of our master plan. What I haven't heard is how we will integrate this planning with the urgent need for meeting our 10% affordable housing threshold. Because my concern is we rezone, and the developers will come in here with the luxury condo plans, which will help increase our density, but will make our challenge around affordable housing worse. So I would like to better understand how we're going to integrate that planning. And then my question is, regarding the timeline, are these deadlines kind of a one and done? Or would we have let's say we, to the chair's point, we have a lot on our plate. These deadlines are challenging. What happens if we, don't meet a December deadline, but come back next year and say, you know what, we've given it more thought, and yeah, we would like to do more work in this area. Could we do it at a later date, or is this schedule one and done? So those are my questions.
Those are great questions, Kathy. And thank you for your comments. I wanted to first speak about the affordability. I also believe that this should be, and the town has the right to require affordability restrictions. We can create that by number of units, or we can. It's up to the town how they do it. Right now, our requirement is that for 6 units, you have to have one that's affordable, and up from there. But I think that's definitely something that we should think of. We should not go behind in our quest to meet our 10% goal with any addition of additional housing. So I'm hopeful that that will be a requirement that the town will support. In terms of the dates, so the dates and the deadlines are all part of the regulations, and the regulations right now are fluent. So I would say that there's an opportunity for those to be changed, and there's an opportunity for there to be an expansion or different phases. So I think those are great questions and might be something that we would consider. And I think Jeffrey said the same. He feels like it's a little bit a hurried timeline. So part of regulations, I don't believe it's a one and done. I think the ultimate goal is to increase housing, and it may take a couple efforts to get there.
Thank you, Sandy. Excuse me. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Sue. Mr. Gang.
Lorraine Iavani, to be recognized by Jeff.
After Steve Gang, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Steve Gang at 46 Norwood. I want to make a quick point in support of Bill Cross's idea here. In my role as proponent and now chair of our task force on water resources, one of the really pleasant surprises, actually one of the amazements for me of starting this task force, is the reservoir of talent that's emerging to work with the task force. Citizens who may or may not have been involved in town boards or commissions before, but particularly the ones who haven't, but have expertise in chemistry and in environment and in engineering and in regional solutions to exactly, to hydrology and geohydrology. I've been quite amazed, and I'm pretty sure, at least morally sure, that we have folks who are skilled in land use planning, experienced in different forms of development, who might not want to do a turn on the planning board, but would be eager to spend a limited amount of time sharing their expertise on a subject like this. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Lorraine Iavani.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Sue. That was excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Quickly, I want to also support the use of perhaps a task force in terms of what Mr. Gang had suggested, as well as Mr. Cross. I think that's a great idea. The question I do have is for Sue. Do we have a calculation, an equation? We're talking in terms of the number of units, and what I'm concerned about, or the question I have is, within each unit, do we have a calculation for what a family would entail? For example, would it be I know this is odd, but 3.5, or would it be 4 individuals? How many people are we talking about in each of these units? And I think, just like for the 40B and the population that we envision there, it's not just about the units, it's also about the number of people, because that is the key here in terms of the density, in terms of our resources, public safety. I know I sound like a broken record. I know you get my emails, but honestly, I'm not opposed to housing, diverse housing, or, and certainly we want it to be affordable. But at the same time, we do have other considerations here on the quality of life for the people who are already here. So Eli came up with an interesting idea, and that is to look at, does it have to be contiguous or not? That's certainly thinking outside the box. I like that. And thank you, Jeff, for recognizing that we have a lot of work to do on coastal threats in terms of mitigating down in that area. So I still hold, why put people, why put buildings at risk in that area? And certainly Mr. Gang will probably look at that. But those are the concerns. A lot of what has already been raised, I don't disagree with it. It's just that we have to be smart in, about what we're doing, and we have to be methodical. And you're right, we are moving quite fast here and on a number of other issues, and that does concern me. And that's the question I have for Sue. So the only question really is, what have we calculated in terms of the population for Manchester if we do push the max on this to some degree? So that's my question. Thank you all. I appreciate all your work. Thank you.
Jeff, yes.
Sue, go ahead, but I heard two questions that hinge together in what Lorraine was saying. What's the last question, which was, what's the calculation of population change? And then within that, what defines a family?
Okay, so I'm gonna try this. So I would say the regulations say nothing about how many people can be in a unit. The guidelines only say that we cannot, in our zoning, limit the number of bedrooms that are allowed in this district. So we can't, in essence, make it a single family or a seniors only district. We have to allow for the accommodation of children. And all that means is that you can't limit the number of bedrooms. So you could have someone come in and propose 3 bedrooms. They could come in and propose, all single bedrooms, and either one would be okay, but we just can't restrict through our zoning the use on the number of bedrooms. So I think the market will completely dictate what is proposed and whether it's a 1-bedroom, a senior unit, a family unit, unless we put in some incentives to create more family units and more 2 or 3 or 4-bedroom units. I think that they generally would come in with a lower number of units, because that's usually what the market is looking for. But so I don't have a number of people per unit. It's the regulations and the guidelines are silent to that. And we've certainly not done any looking at any assessment of what exists there currently. Probably not a satisfactory answer, but I don't know how else to answer all of this.
Thank you, Sue. I recognize Sarah Creighton.
Good evening. Thank you for holding this forum, and Sue, thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very helpful. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the next steps, and I think Bill Cross has made an interesting proposal for a task force, but I'd like to speak against it. I think that the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board are elected boards, and they hold public meetings and take the responsibility of minutes and open meeting law very seriously. And to add to and the Finance Committee and the Zoning Board and the Concom and all the rest of the boards in town. And I think it should be this should be integrated into that work. I also will say that, we've been undertaking for 2 years a comprehensive zoning review, and I think this should be dovetailed with that. And this work is, as Sue has tried to detail tonight, it's detailed and it's complicated. And I invite everyone to the regular planning board meetings, most Mondays at 7 p.m. to sit with us and think through the various challenging details of zoning and how much time it takes and how integrated this has to be with other things. So it's not that a task force is bad, it's just that I think that it's has to be integrated with the other work that is being done and that elected boards are doing that in part. And also I think that in terms of the capacity of the town staff to go to more night meetings and to deliver timely minutes and those kinds of things is a challenge that we have right now. And so I think it should be integrated with existing boards, the Board of Selectmen or the Planning Board, or however the Board of Selectmen decides and the Planning Board jointly decide to do this, but I don't think we need a task force.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else who would like to make a comment or ask a question to obtain more information about this law, the regulations, the path forward, next steps, etc.? I see Becky's hand and I'm going to recognize her, but I also want to invite, we currently have 42 participants and we've heard from about 9 or 10. I would really like to hear other people's thoughts on this, concerns, etc. Becky, go ahead.
And my apologies, Sue, if you already answered this, but I just wanted to go back to Lorraine's question about what constitutes a family in this, for this bylaw? Do we know?
So the bylaw, so neither the law, chapter 40A, section 3, nor the guidelines make mention of family. So they only say that it must, well, they make mention of it in saying that a family, zoning cannot be restricted to families, or it has to be suitable for families. The HCD has indicated that, means you can't restrict bedrooms. So it doesn't, that's about as far as it goes. It doesn't try to define what a family is or how many people are in a family. It just means you can't use the number of bedrooms to essentially prohibit families from this housing.
Good, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sarah Millish.
Yeah, so I have one thought. I
Sarah, could you
understand.
please identify yourself and your address?
Excuse me, Sarah Mellish, 11 Bennett Street.
Thank you.
I understand that Sue said that not all of the lots in the general district qualify because some of them are larger than 6,000 square feet. Therefore, if you can put 3 families on it, you're not getting the same density as you would with a 6,000 square foot lot. And you might not be able to divide the lots because of frontage or something like that. And, in a lot of the town, we have the district, the overlay district, which covers the first 100 feet along various streets. And I'm wondering if we might consider in certain areas of the general district of not requiring the frontage to be able to divide lots and to have common driveways or something like that. I think it's happened a lot in town where it shouldn't have, that there's a lot of lots with no frontage, but that might be one way of expanding the general district to cover a larger portion of what we need to conform with this regulation. That's just a thought. Thanks.
Anyone else interested in making a comment at this point? Okay, I would like to, and feel free, this is not a cutoff of the public debate, to raise your hand and I'll recognize you as soon as we can. I'd like to ask Greg to comment on some of the notes that he gave to the selectmen regarding comments for the public hearing on the regulations. Specifically, and I don't want to botch this, so I'd like you to pick it up whenever you can, Greg. The 15%
Right.
issue.
So the guideline, back up a little bit. Many communities across the Commonwealth have been taking a look at this and raising questions and some concerns about the feasibility and sort of a rallying cry that one size doesn't fit all, that each community is unique and that the guidelines should try to take that into account. Is your half-mile radius half in water or not? Ours doesn't happen to be, but there are towns that would suffer from that. Does a town have a sewer system that has lots of capacity, or is it all on-site septic? And should the regulations accommodate that? One of the common themes has been this question that the guideline sets sort of 2 standards. One is the 750 units as a minimum, as a floor. And then depending on how, if you have more housing in your community already, then it drops down to a percentage basis. For communities that for communities that have a commuter rail, that percentage is 15%. So many communities have raised the question, well, why don't we just set that as the standard? Why have the 750 as a floor? Why don't we just put everyone on the same playing field in terms of requirements and require 15% of your housing stock as of the 2020 census, which is that second category that they're using. So I know that a number of communities on the North Shore are submitting that as a comment to the state, that they would be more comfortable with across the board percent rather than a floor of 750, which seems to burden the smaller communities. Some will argue, well, that's because as a smaller community, you haven't done your fair share over the last 50 years or something. So that's the other side of the coin. But in terms of impact to a community going forward, there's an argument perhaps that can be made there. So that is one area that I know that a number of communities are commenting on, that they don't feel that the 750 floor, that seems arbitrary to them. Where did that come from? And for smaller communities than us, that 750 could be 50% of their existing housing. So it doesn't, it's not sitting well with some other communities. So that's one area. As I say,
I'm sorry, Greg, I'm not sure whether it's just my computer, but you broke up in that last comment, that last tail on your comment, that the 750, have you done the calculation if we went to 15%?
It would be about half.
It would be 375 is what I got.
Be 375-ish, yeah.
Yeah.
365, 375 in that area.
Okay.
So that's one area of potential comment. Allowing a different set of timelines. Is there a process by which a community could request an extension if needed? I think that would be a fair comment to make. That again, that not all communities have the staffing capacity to jump in on this. Certainly smaller communities like ourselves, we struggle with that. We, as you have indicated, we've got a lot on our plate already. And so to add this is a bigger lift than perhaps a larger community would have with more planning staff. So that's another area you could consider putting a comment in. And there are others, but those are a couple examples.
Has there been, one of the other hats that Greg has been wearing for us has been a liaison to the Cape Ann study of sea level rise. And has there been any specific kinds of commentary coming from other communities? The line that we're on runs over marshes. It could never be built today. It runs over marshes through both the city of Lynn and other communities, but it comes all the way up along the seashore, certainly within impact of sea level rise. It'd be horrible to have all this development occur and then 50 years from now, have that development not be tenable or feasible or sustainable because of sea level rise. So my question to you is, what's the buzz on that from the people that you've been working with in that community?
Yeah, so there are real concerns about the viability of the commuter rail, just because of what you just said, Jeff, that it has significant challenges to remain viable with sea level rise. and the expected storms. Major portions of that line will be wiped out in a relatively minor storm. A category 1 or 2 hurricane will take out miles of track. So it is a concern, and the simulation of a category 3 hurricane certainly demonstrates that in terms of the impacts to the commuter rail just on Cape Ann. So it's again, that could be another area of commentary.
Okay. Any other public comment? Hello, Sheila Hill. You're muted, Sheila.
I'm out. Have you missed me? I'm out of practice.
All right, I think now we can say that the vernal equinox has happened. Hello, Sheila.
It's over. It's the new world. So Greg's clarification has inspired me to speak, even though I promised myself not to. I have found, as most of you are aware, over the past 2 years, going on 3, that Governor Baker's administration has, I see that it has a problem, a housing problem to solve. I haven't cared for the methodology. 40B, 40R, and now 40A, which I find basically untenable in just about every way for our tiny community, most of which is on the water and in the floodplain. But what I really want to register objections to is the fact that Baker would threaten us with respect to grant money. If we don't go along with this, we don't get to claw back all the taxes we pay in Massachusetts. I really object to that. And I would like to see, in fact, when I get back, intend to work on a coalition of Cape Ann communities who are going to just push back on this as untenable and overreach. It just attempts to alter the character of the towns that we want to preserve the character of our small towns. But the threat, I find really, I don't know, perhaps an act of desperation, but I want to object to it. And I am hoping that both Greg and Sue can balance some of the detriments of this 40A in the face of what I imagine is the pressure they feel from MAPC, et cetera, to launch a full-scale effort to adhere to it. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Point of clarification.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Sue and Greg this question. Point of clarification, is the withholding of grant monies, et cetera, part of regulation, or is it part of the law itself?
I believe it's part of the regulations, but I could be wrong because I haven't looked into it. Let me just kind of put a little bit of perspective on that. The town creates an open space and recreation plan every 7 years and doesn't mind a bit. Part of the reason they do that, it makes them eligible for funding, for grant funding, for certain pots of money, for land acquisition and the rest. So it's not a new idea to use grant funding as an incentive. So I just want to say this is not, it's not unrealistic or out of the ordinary to try to incentivize communities to take part in programs.
I'm not sure either, Jeff. I'd have to go back to the law and read it a little more carefully to just refresh my memory on that point.
Because if it's part of the law, it's not Governor Baker's. It doesn't sit in Governor Baker's lap. It sits in the legislature's lap. If it's part of the regulations, then it sits in DHCD and therefore Baker's lap. But be that as it may, either way, we face a very challenging timeline and some very complicated, interconnected issues related to this whole area of 48. So, E. Colbert, could you please state your name and your address and share your questions, comments, or concerns?
Hi, I'm Liz Colbert, 22 C Street. I'm just wondering what this will look like if the town does choose to adopt it. For those of us who live within a half mile of the train station, does that mean our currently single family residence will be a multifamily residence? And if that is the case, what is to keep a developer from outbidding every young family who wants to buy one of our older historic homes, from outbidding these young families, knocking them down and building, multifamily homes, because then you're actually hurting the people you're trying to help getting into your community, because it will entice developers because they have the by right now to build whatever they want. So can you just help me understand, for those of us who do live within the half mile of the MBTA station, what will this look like?
So I think the short answer is we don't know yet. We're at the very early stages and have to have that conversation as a community. So it doesn't have to be within the half mile. It can actually extend beyond that. I think half of it has to be within the half mile, and others can be beyond. And so again, it's not, well, I'll back up. The regulations that the town might adopt could steer the development so that it does provide, as Sue indicated, more affordable. So it's not just a grab by developers. So I think the short answer is we have a lot more conversation and a lot more thinking about how we might respond to this. So I don't have a definitive answer for you in terms of what it's going to look like. Too early to tell. But Sue, feel free to.
Sue, do you want to add to that?
I guess I would just say that for a land owner, it doesn't take away any rights. You still have the choice of retaining a single family. And I think that's what we see throughout the general district today. While 3 families are allowed as of right, the vast majority are single family, and it's been that way for a long time. So I don't think that there will be a wholesale change of people's opinions from wanting to move from a single family to a 3 family. It'll be allowed, but I don't see that we'll have a wholesale change of heart of the homeowners in the area. There may be added pressure if there's a real interest in development. So there may be offers for purchase, or the price may go up for homeowners, existing homeowners. I think we can't do anything about that market, but I think we have to think long and hard about the regulations and the type of housing that we want to see, and try to build or allow housing types and density that's consistent with the neighborhood. So we do have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of information to gather and opinions to gather, and but I think we're up for the challenge. I still believe that something good can come of it, and we can direct the housing to where it would be most suitable. So thank you for your questions, Liz.
Mary Foley.
Thank you, Mary Foley, 1 Pulaski Drive. Greg, I think you touched upon this, but I'm not clear on the answer. I did see in the Essex Town Administrator report that he referenced that there's Cape Ann communities that are collaborating on a letter to the state regarding this and the struggles. Is Manchester one of those communities?
So the different managers and administrators have been working on a letter, a joint letter. The manager in Middleton has taken the lead on that, and he was going to circulate a draft of that to us by the end of this week. So that would be something that would be separate from what the selectmen or the planning board or anybody else, for that matter, can do for submitting comments to the state. The earlier draft that I saw focused on this 15% versus the 750 dichotomy for smaller communities. It focused on, so it had the number points. So one point was this 15% versus the 750. Another point was the differences in communities with their different sewer systems and water systems, and not having any recognition of that in the guidelines. That they feel that there should be some sort of a, I don't know if it's a point system or what, but some sort of recognition that towns with utilities that have a lot of capacity are in a different position than towns that relies 100% on private wells and septic systems. Those are two very different types of communities and what they're able to build. And shouldn't the regulations recognize that? The third point was the sort of the buildability of land. So if you draw that circle and half of it's in water, that again doesn't seem like a fair requirement. At least the regulation should account for that sort of peculiar arrangement, or just the uniqueness of each town. So those were the main points that the letter that the managers were working on.
So will Manchester be on that letter?
Well, I very well may sign it. I need to take a final look at the letter, but I've been submitting comments and encouraging my colleagues to do it, that I would join them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And just a quick follow-up. I believe MAPC's comments on the proposed regulations, we expect to see that by the end of this week.
Greg, has there been or will there be public hearings on these regulations that one could go to and address directly?
I know that that DHCD has been on a roadshow. They've held different presentations. I know that they gave a presentation to different mayor groups around the state, and they've taken comments at those settings. I'm not aware of formal public hearings that they've held. I think they've just made themselves available for presentations and are allowing public comments up and through the end of the month.
So there's no requirement within the law that public hearings have to be held?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you. Here at Manchester by the Sea and this public forum, are there any other participants who would like to make a comment or raise a question tonight? Okay, hearing none. I'd like to go back to just the Board of Selectmen response to this. Does the Board of Selectmen wish to submit a letter of comment on the regulations? Eli?
Yes, I think we should submit a letter of comment. I'm not prepared tonight to finalize or significantly debate the content. We could, I think we could do a little bit of discussion about it. I think it definitely, if we do tonight, it should be very time boxed.
Okay, we have, starting tomorrow, 8 days to get this letter in. We do have a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday, but that has a particular agenda and that it relates to town meeting. Does the board wish to take up finalizing a draft of this letter in that meeting?
That seems reasonable.
Okay, Becky?
I agree with what Eli said. I definitely think we should send one. Would like a little time to digest tonight, as well as again, go back over the state, the 40A. But is it possible for Greg to draft a letter based on the 3 items, just as a starting point for Tuesday?
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Can you identify those 3 items, Becky, that you're referring to?
Yeah, the number, the specific 750 versus the 15%. Number 2 would be the rigidity of the timeline. And then 3rd would be, I think, just what if the state has any plans to deal with the commuter rail and its vulnerabilities, and since that would greatly impact us as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Becky. John Round.
Yeah, Jeff, at a minimum, I'd send in a note right away trying to get some more time. I think this is getting jammed into a very, very narrow window here. And I'd fire a letter, and I think most communities probably would want to fire a letter out and say, can we have an extra month or 2 months or something to comment? The overall timeline, the total time is not a problem. It's just what they're trying to jam in up front here in the next month or 2. And I'm not sure if you get a response quickly. In the absence of that, yes, the kind of the short agenda that Becky mentioned, we've got to go with, but we've got so many other things going on. I don't think we can give the appropriate attention to this to put together a cogent and complete list of comments. Greg, have your colleagues, I assume that they have commented about the short timeline, but has anybody thought about just going back to these folks and saying, give us an extra month or 2?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, John. I could inquire. These guidelines initially came out the end of the year, first of the new year.
December.
Yeah, they were in December. Yeah. It's one of those items that was not on the front burner when they first came out. That's for sure.
I think we need more time to give it the time that it demands and deserves.
If I have any understanding of regulatory comment periods, the chances of getting that to move, we could write such a letter, but the chances of getting that to move are pretty close to 0. So we need to be prepared to put in perhaps not the finest prose that we could, but some specific comments that address some of the concerns that we have from the point of view of our own town.
I will say that we have an opportunity this Friday with the chamber caucus with our legislative delegation, Senate and House, stateside. Certainly have an opportunity to speak directly to our reps and senator. It won't be the first that they've heard some comments on this. I know that they've been hearing from boards and from many towns. So, but we could take advantage of that opportunity this Friday.
Okay. Did you get that, Becky?
I did, Greg. I'll touch base with you prior to that.
I'm responding that way to inform the public that I'm out of town and will not be in town or available to that chamber session. And Becky, who is the vice chair of the Selectmen, has kindly agreed to step into that place. So thank you.
My pleasure.
First time I've been out of town in years.
And well deserved.
Okay.
Anne's got her hand up, Jeff.
Yes, Anne.
Just a suggestion for the letter from the board. Although we have a limited amount of the circle that's underwater. We have a great deal more, at least substantially more, land that's subject to 100-year floods that's in the general district. And
good point.
So if you're drafting something, just, we don't want to build something that goes underwater.
Yep.
Thank you.
I very much agree with that point, Ann. That's what I was trying to raise previously. So thank you.
Just a different way of saying what you've already said.
Yep. But much clearer. Okay. If there's no other public comment tonight, I want to thank you all for coming and participating in this forum. And if the board decides to submit the letter that we're discussing right now, that would probably be a decision that will be made next Tuesday at our board meeting, which is going to be an early morning board meeting. That agenda hasn't been finalized yet. So when that letter does go out, we will certainly have it accessible on the website with other 40A materials, including Sue's presentation. So thank you for your participation. I would take a motion to adjourn from the Board of Selectmen.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Becky and seconded by, I believe, Ann. Roll call vote. Becky Jakes,
Yes.
John Round,
Yes.
Eli Bowling,
Yes.
Ann Harrison,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you
and
for
thank
leading
you to
it.
Sue.
Thank you.
Yep. Good night, everybody.
Good night.